have to talk about that. Right.
Professional podcasters.
So before we begin, I'm going to continue my sentence I was just saying to him. He's not going to rant. And if any of you know anything about this podcast, he is definitely going to rant. So I am ready and waiting for another infamous or famous rant.
I like building a second brain. Go on, John, rant about that. No, so the concept,
deflect.
The topic of the conversation is unified framework, and the reason I put that in there is because building a second brain, I like the ideas, I like the concepts, but I don't agree with a lot of them in application because of the differences that we all have. And the reason I'm going to say I like building a second brain is I like it as a framework for everyone else to build from. Something in academia which drives me nuts is academics from different research fields, mainly, well, not even research fields, different groups in the same field sometimes. They come up with their own frameworks, they come up with their own systems, their own words and terminologies and meanings for different things that are essentially the exact same as someone else. They've just added something small or changed something here or done something there. You're like, I don't want to learn this whole new theory when it's exactly the same as something else. Because then when you end up writing these things and have synthesis and meta-analysis, you're like, these 13 theories all say the exact same thing. So I'm going to now reference all 13 of these things. Working memory is a perfect example. There are so many different frameworks in the same thing: working memory, long-term working memory, short-term memory, and then all the different frameworks inside of those things. You're like, come on. Building a second brain, code specifically, I think is a nice framework for us to build from. Capture. Okay, let's talk about capture. Organize. Let's talk about organize. Distill. Let's talk about distill. Rather than capture, I'm going to do all these other random things first. It's all just capture. Just bucket it, capture. We're talking about code, and then go into your nuances afterwards. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think having a kind of unified framework is really useful, but I think what is often missing from this and why the frameworks end up being criticized by people like us who care about nuance is everyone follows it verbatim. When I was in my cohort of building a second brain, I was like, well, how do I do this? Well, how do I do that? Tell me what I should do. And there is a huge risk in getting someone else to tell you what to do because there is absolutely zero nuance. Tiago Forte now has a kid, but at that time didn't have a kid. So perhaps some of his advice would not have fit for someone who had a child. Or let's say you are neurodiverse. I don't know whether Tiago is neurodivergent, who knows? But if you have that, and I just poke you with that one. Boop. Poke you with that one. Boop.
Bloody categories.
It's a language that people relate to. It may not work, and every single person is slightly different. And so what's missing is taking the frameworks and adapting them to the individual, which I think is not scalable. I should know. It's what I do with my business. It's just not scalable. So it makes much more sense to do what Tiago does. But from a standpoint of actually helping people get what they want and need by the end of it, it becomes really restrictive to be put into that framework if you are not really careful. I think a good example from my specific thing, I don't think code existed when I did my cohort, so I may have to go and peek at it again to see what it was. I'm not sure whether it's quite the same thing or quite as emphasized.
It was certainly there, but I don't know how emphasized it was because Tiago mentions it all over in the free content, and did say something in the cohort video, something like cohort 3 or 4 code was born, but it didn't.
Oh, maybe it was.
It didn't
No,
look
I think
like
it
code. It was sort of this is a kind of theory that we have, or a kind of framework that we have. Now that the whole curriculum is based around code, like week 1 is capture, week 2 is organize, week 3 distill, week 4 express.
Yeah, I think it was similar. Maybe it was. It just wasn't quite so prevalent in my cohort. I don't remember. It's been a long time. I've taken a lot of courses since then.
Course junkie.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much. Not as much anymore.
Fair. Yeah. So moving on your point, going on your point a little bit with regards to the frameworks and how they can be used, I think they are useful as a starting point to get people to attach to something, rather than it being sort of out in the ether. Here you go. Here's loads of random words, evergreen notes, atomic notes, capturing stuff. What? I think it's a nice grounding, not a nice place to start. But as soon as you understand it and you have a grasp of it, go away.
Yeah, it's very much once you get the baseline understanding of what code is, which is quite quick because, to his credit, they are pretty good with hammering in the basics of code. That is something that they're very good, and the whole course is built about that, and that is really powerful. The thing that I found, and I think you're finding too, is the lack of nuance afterwards.
I think he does the best job he can to create nuance by using the mentors, because the mentors are meant to bring in the nuance for the tools and the scenarios and the professions and the practitioners you have. But
they're the tools. Let's be real. It's focused on the tools from what I can see, unless I'm wrong.
So they are sort of focused on the tools because you can't talk about how you take notes without the tool, because the tool is a constraint. It's an affordance and a constraint. Certain tools afford you to do certain things and constrain you to do other things. So ideally you'd have someone in like content creation that uses Obsidian, content creation uses Evernote, content creation uses Roam, blah, blah, blah. But that's just not possible. You'd have an infinite amount of mentors. And to be honest, the mentors that I've seen are not Obsidian true users. From my experience, the people mentoring in Obsidian, yeah, the mentors using Obsidian, they're either new to Obsidian, so still discovering things. Like they're still going, oh, there's this plugin, and oh, there's this feature that you can do. And in my mind, I understand you're teaching a philosophy, a framework, code through the lens of a beginner user, but if you're going to teach people about Obsidian and go all over the place, I think it's going to create more conflict than it does help. Obsidian is still a useful tool, and I've seen a lot of conversations in the cohort like, where do I start? How do I do this? And this, that, and the other. And I've had people on my videos as well say, Obsidian seems really complicated. I'm like, no, it's a text editor with links. If you want to make it complicated, you can. And some people have even said that Obsidian is more complicated than Notion. I was like, what? No.
You're using you're sorry, the nicest possible way, and I hate saying things like this, but you're using Obsidian wrong if it's harder than Notion.
Just no. I mean, Mike Vardy went from Evernote to Obsidian, end of 21, and I haven't seen him go back, and I don't see him going back. And he used Evernote for years. Like when I first found Mike Vardy, he was using Evernote. That was a long time ago. What, 5-6 years ago now? I've spoken to him a couple of times as well, but yeah, and he uses Obsidian. But so I think that the framework is useful, and the nuance comes in with how people use the framework. But the tool that you use is going to obviously change how you use the framework, which is where I think the nuances should be. with regards to where people share, I don't get any value from people sharing what code is. I know what code is. That's great. I don't get value from people sharing how they capture stuff on their tool. I know how to capture stuff on my tool. That's cool. I want the nuances. Why do you capture like that? How do you capture like that? How do you move from that highlight to that highlight? Why do you move from these highlights or these pages or these blocks, these whatever, to that? What is the point of you expressing it? Why are you doing this? Those nuances, and how do you go about doing it? Do you do it in half an hour blocks, 25-minute blocks like Pomodoro, or an 2-hour slog because this is my thing? Like, I want to know those things. Those are the nuances of how to use code rather than what is code.
Yeah, because I think the what is fine, and that is the what, but understanding just that little bit more of how it's done. There is so much. And it's not, I don't think it's even how, it's the what of the how. It's like, why are you doing it this way? It's not even the why, but I'll use why because it's easier to say. But it's like, why are you doing this? Because that's actually where the best parts of a framework, any framework is. It's like, I think, was it last week's podcast was me talking about my use of para and how I basically broke all the rules of para and made my own. And I know that Marie has done the same into her own thing now. Horizons, I think hers is now.
Yeah.
It might have changed again.
Horizon Designs.
Yeah, Horizon Designs. And I love the fact that people are talking about breaking it, but people need to talk more about it.
Are you rustling your mic?
I don't think so, no.
Certainly sounds like it's moving.
No?
Okay, maybe it's just me.
It's just you. You're rustling. Has it stopped?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've lost my train of thought now.
You were talking about Marie, Horizons, and them doing their own thing outside of para. So
yeah, well, it's outside of para and within para at the same time. It's using the philosophies of para, which is the actual cool stuff and actual valuable stuff, and then creating your own version that suits your style of working and the way that you personally work, versus trying to force yourself to just use para in the traditional perfect way that you are taught. Because if you use it in that way, that's just Tiago's way of working. It's how Tiago functions. And there is nothing wrong with that, but you are not Tiago. And you have to figure out where you sit within it.
it's so some of the mentors have actually said that they disagree with the way Tiago does it, para and other things, because they do it differently. So some of them in para, they see areas as the main section and projects as the section below it. So it's areas and projects rather than projects and areas, because they're life area first rather than project first. Tiago is more project first, and there are loads of other examples throughout the conversations. But what came to mind was I'm going to say I had a rant today in my video journal, and it was around oversimplification. Essentially, a video oversimplified a theory, misinterpreted the theory, and then when they tried to explain the theory to me, they said, "I don't want to go into too much depth," and then they oversimplified the explanation again, and came to the same non-conclusion. It's not a wrong conclusion, it's just a conclusion that doesn't sit with the scientists that they're supposedly referencing. And I think the same thing can be said for the building a second brain framework. I think a lot of people oversimplify what building a second brain is, what code is, because building a second brain isn't just hey, I now have a notes app for my stuff, which I think is a misconception a lot of people hold. I have a second brain in this notes app. No, that's not what building a second brain is. Building a second brain is having extended cognition, which is everywhere. All tools, all apps, hardware, software, even your fingers, right? And learning how to utilize that in the best way possible. But how to do that is where all the nuance comes in, and that's where it gets complex. So the oversimplification is creating misconceptions, and I've done loads of research into misconceptions, specifically Derek Muller's work and misconceptions inside of multimedia video. But the same principles applies with conceptual change. Is if you have misconceptions, you need to essentially unlearn the misconception to then relearn or learn the correct it's not correct, but the more accurate, the more scientifically backed, evidence-based way around doing whatever it is. So I would prefer less oversimplified videos, explanations of something, but that's my preference.
However, that is that brings up a whole nother issue, because that was something that I faced and why I moved away from YouTube, because the YouTube meta is short, sharp, punchy videos, or really, really, really fucking long stuff that no one watches. And you're at a position now where you have you built an audience on short, sharp videos that taught people how to do something. That gives you the flexibility to create videos that you want to create. There are still risks of that, obviously, and I understand that, but you can do longer form videos and you will have a decent-ish reach from your videos.
I mean, my longer videos are the ones that do better. The 3 hour live stream, the 1 hour video on Obsidian, those are the videos that do better. But I did grow my audience on shorter videos. And when it comes to actual content, I think this is down to the responsibility of the individuals. And the way I see the world moving, moving forwards, is essentially a piece of content is the same as a voice, a conversation. And when you're speaking in public, it's kind of the same as speaking in video. So if you would have a conversation with someone and you don't really know what you're talking about, you wouldn't really talk about it, like unless you know more than the person you're talking to, right? Because you don't want to make yourself sound silly. I mean, that's psychology. I'm not going to go into it, but that's generally the trend. But in videos on YouTube, people are like, oh, I found out this new thing, I'm going to teach you all about it. But it's not that you don't know much about it. It's just there's so much that you don't know yet that other people are then also getting the misconceptions that you have, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I think there is a responsibility for creators, like individuals. It's not the industry itself. It's not YouTube or anything. They can't do anything. It's the people themselves, either consuming the content or creating the content, that need to have the awareness to go, okay, this person is at this stage of learning. They may have some misconceptions, or I'm creating something, but I know I don't know a lot of this stuff, so I need to make it clear. And one of my biggest gripes when people say this is evidence-based is it's not evidence-based. They have one paper that suggests one thing or has one theory, and then they just interpret it to mean that thing. You're not evidence-based. You have an opinion about a research paper. They are different things.
Yeah. But there's also a point of like, do you have enough time? And also, YouTube is
I think that comes down to responsibility.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I'm just playing devil's advocate because it's fun. It's like, is it not the responsibility of the watcher or listener to go, yeah, I'm not sure about that, and look things up? Would you not say? And have a critical mind?
Is it their responsibility? Yes. Will they do it? No, because humans' cognitive bias is to favor prior beliefs, prior knowledge, and prior understanding, or to accept whatever the supposed expert says, because humans don't like thinking. We're efficient, not lazy, we're efficient like that. We try not to think where not possible unless it conflicts with something that we have. Cognitive conflict, which is where conceptual change happens. And I think every creator should recognize that, so at least try and mitigate that, whether that is share two different perspectives of the same thing, be explicit about that they're saying an opinion, or leave references for other people to explore and make it obvious that their references are there. So it's not a presentation of fact, it's an ongoing conversation, which is where I think misconceptions of science happen quite a lot. And I think the same thing happens with Building a Second Brain and other courses that are similar. It's spoken as if like, this is a lecture, I'm teaching you about this thing that is this fact. It's not, it's this ongoing conversation that's constantly evolving and changing. And I think the presentation style potentially leads to it being fact rather than an ongoing conversation.
And also there's the marketing piece of that as well. If you think business wise, saying you don't know what you're talking about isn't a great, you got to have a lot of balls and a lot of confidence to be able to go, I have no clue what I'm talking about. So I'm going to say it too. I only have an opinion. I only have a thought. And selling stuff on that is selling people on that in the meta of the marketing world. You have to look like an expert. You have to behave like an expert, even when you are. There's a reason why my reach is not very high, because I never say I know stuff, even though I do know stuff. I know quite a lot, but just because I know stuff doesn't mean it's right. I know what I know, but I know that I don't know everything. And that's when marketing becomes a hindrance in terms of going after real change and taking responsibility. Because at the end of the day, there's a responsibility. It's choosing your responsibility, because there is a responsibility no matter what you do. There is a responsibility and there is a consequence of your responsibility. I think what you're saying is that they need to be aware of the consequence if they do that in that way. It's like, if you say things are factual, they will assume it's factual even if it's not. And are you okay with that? And being able to understand, now you and myself are not okay with that, obviously.
Yep.
And I think with marketing in particular, there is a small movement that is moving to more honest marketing, where coaches don't assume they know everything and consultants don't say that they are correct all the time. My whole spiel at the beginning when I meet a new person is I'm going to get things wrong, but I'm going to do everything I can to help. That is the whole thing I start with. But in the entrepreneurial space that we inhabit, it becomes harder to say things like that. You got to have a lot of balls and a lot of confidence.
And I think that is why academics don't do well in marketing, because all academics, whether they're professors or just practicing academics in research, whether it's PhD, postdoc, or wherever, they want to find out science. They want to do science. They want to know stuff. They don't want to be able to market it as fact because they don't know it as fact. And this is where it's something that I've been struggling with at the moment. This is where the social scientists really struggle, because in physics, in maths, in mechanics, you can say, if you do this thing will be better. in social science, you can't do that. You can't say that, because it's correlations, it's qualitative data, there are trends, there are likelihoods, but you can't say that 1 + 1 is 2.
No, I think that's also quite, when you work in a industry that uses psychology, I'll use psychology specifically because it's kind of like neuroscience in the brain and how we work and how we function. It is really hard to go, this is how you are. People do that, but anyone who actually knows just a tiny little bit, and I'm not an expert, but even my own research, my small slither of research is like, yeah, I know shit. Which is probably why I don't create content, or one of the reasons, and two, because I just don't have time anymore and can't be bothered. It's not a priority. Is what I should really say, not have time. I have all the time I need. But it's like, it's not a priority because the content that I create is all speculative. It's not fact. And people want to be hit with the 5 tips, the 5 facts that will help you get better, and the 5 this and the 5 that and the 10 this and the 10 that.
Your mic's doing that thing again.
I'm nowhere near the mic. Sorry.
Don't know. So it's funny. I had a lot of different sort of like thoughts going along the line, and it all came to like one bit right at the end, which is, how do we have a conversation about something that you can't illustrate? Because again, this was sort of related in my video journal today with physics, mechanics, maths, etc. You can create illustrations. There's a light bulb and then there's wires, or here's this balance board, or whatever it is. All we can really do is say, this is an experiment that happened, and you can illustrate the experiment and then explain sort of what could happen, but that's it. And what's irritating to me now that I'm moving into ecological psychology and trying to understand that to an extent is that memory, everyone just assumes memory is stored, right? What if it's not? Because when you actually look into memory, memory isn't stored in one place. It's not one thing. Memory, or memories themselves, are actions. This is what happens to all of these neurons at this different time in the brain to form this memory. But each time you have a memory, different neurons activate different times. Obviously, we're talking like small differences here. And I saw a nice analogy on one of the channels. It's kind of like a Mexican wave. If one person puts their arms up, that's not one memory. If they all do it sort of in pattern, in sequence, then it's the memory. But that sequence could look like loads of different things. So memory isn't stored. It's an action, which means if it's not stored somewhere, all of the cognitive science that we currently know revolves around it being stored somewhere. Long-term memory store, working memory store. Well, if it's not stored and it's an action and it's a fluctuating dynamic action, then all the analogies, the things that we've used currently don't quite work because the environment is going to change the dynamics of the memory, in which case you can't say, if you do this thing 10 times, your memory will get better, because those 10 times are going to be 10 different instances of potentially a different memory, not the same memory, in which case without getting too complicated, the environment is actually creating the memory rather than the memory just being stored and then altered. And then that obviously gets very complicated very quickly. But if we've assumed something and we've built loads of stuff around it and we've gone, yeah, look, here's this whole field, but actually the assumption right at the start, memory is stored, isn't true or entirely true, or maybe there's some nuances in there that were misunderstood, then the entire field suddenly needs to be rewritten.
Yeah.
I don't think that happens in physics or maths. It's not like 1 + 1 suddenly can't equal 2.
Yeah.
And creating content and explanations around that, how in the world do you do that? I don't think you can, which is why I struggle to, like, a lot of the content that I see, conversations that I see around philosophy, psychology, are conversations. They're not illustrations. They're not, this is how you do this thing. And when people do say, this is how you do this thing, it's when I get irritated.
Well done. Well saved.
Yeah, it's when I get irritated.
Yeah, and that does go back to, just from my personal experience as a business owner who is trying to run a business that is basically inspired by, I wouldn't say based on, but some of the concepts in psychology and how our brains work and how we function and how we think we function. And it's always a theory.
So you said how our brains work.
Yeah.
I know of 4 main theories about how the brain works, and they're all drastically different.
Yeah, exactly.
And people say, oh yeah, our brain works like this. I'm like, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. As soon as, and this is one of those things where you don't know what you don't know, and it's irritating when I see it in videos online. Not just videos, but also podcasts. Like, you can't really comment on a podcast, whereas you can on YouTube. As soon as you respond to someone using concepts that they're talking about, but they don't know they're talking about, and they don't know what the answer is, and I'm like, then please just say you don't know, rather than trying to give me an answer. Because online, you don't know what the person commenting knows, right? This could get a little bit meta. So if I'm talking to someone and I ask them about something that they don't know about, for whatever reason, they try and give me an answer, but it's obvious they don't know what they're talking about. But they try and give me an answer because I assume they think that I don't know. And it's so annoying. Why do we assume people don't know? Because they might. There might be that one person in the comment section actually knows what they're talking about, which is why I treat everyone online as someone that knows more than me, unless they show me that they don't, by either sharing science that just isn't true, sharing misconceptions that isn't true, or saying something that just isn't evidence-backed, or they just say, I don't know. And this is one of those assumptions where online people assume the worst rather than the best. And I guess that's a half empty, half full issue or analogy. But like, when I say Bayesian brain hypothesis to people that are talking about thinking and they go, what? I'm like, leave me alone, go away. Right, free energy principle, Bayesian brain hypothesis. If you don't know what that is and you're talking about thinking and you're trying to explain what it is, just go away. Just leave me alone. Hot take, but yeah, leave me alone.
It is such a hot take. Assume the best in people unless they're wrong, and then they can go away.
No, but that is like, if you're talking about how the brain works and you don't know what the Bayesian brain hypothesis is, then that's the most popular theory in proactive inference. If you don't know what that is and you're talking about how the brain works, then you're not talking about how the brain works. What you're talking about is your opinion about the limited research that you've done. Because proactive inference is what's used in the free energy principle. It's what's used in the majority of predictive processing, which is how the brain supposedly works in cognitive science. The Bosman's brain is a sort of a quantum physics mechanical example of it, kind of really meta, because it sort of says that we're not in it, but we are in it. And then you have like controlled hallucinations from consciousness and Anil Seth, and how we use potentially predictive processing or computational cognitive science to create like, in our mind, we're creating a hallucination for us to live through, in which, that's
super cool idea.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
controlled hallucinations. But yeah, and then there's that, and then you have ecological psychology as well. Like,
And then
that
we just all cry and sob in a corner because everything we thought was a lie.
exactly. But if you don't know these competing theories in how the brain works, how the mind works, how consciousness could be implied, or like implicitly implied or explicitly implied, then why are you talking about the brain and how the brain works? What you should be talking about is, in my opinion, I think we think like this, but it's not evidence backed, rather than saying the brain works like this. Yeah, there's small differences, but they lead to drastically different results. Yeah,
So
I
what's
don't really
the
want to. I don't really want to go into any of the science there. What's the solution? Like I say, I think it is explaining yourself as like yourself, true to yourself, like saying so for example, in the video where I'm still editing the video because it took me far longer to read the research than I thought, I tried to understand misconceptions in multimedia learning. That's literally what I say at the beginning. Like, I read Veritassim's PhD thesis and I tried to understand it. Like, and that's the whole process. I don't know how misconceptions work. Well, I know more now because I've read the thesis. And there are things that I did know beforehand, but also things that I didn't know beforehand. And I'm showing my journey learning through it rather than saying this is this thing. And then I can then use the paper that I've read to cite and say, this is what they think. The 4 steps of conceptual change in this paper were this, but I think that behavior change should also be included, and using some sort of ontological approach should also be included into conceptual change rather than just using these 4 steps. But that's showing me going, okay, this is what the paper says. This is other things that I thought about that should be included, but I don't know what that looks like yet. And I think that's the best way to approach it, rather than saying misconceptions should be used because of A, B, C, D, and conceptual change works like steps 1, 2, 3, 4. No. Instead of writing a conclusion, continue the conversation. That's how I would approach it when sharing information. Yeah. Don't write conclusions, continue conversations.
But people like a conclusion.
I don't care.
Especially on YouTube.
Yeah, they don't like a conclusion. They like something easy for them to go away with. So whether that is a single question that can get them going away and thinking, or a single idea, a single action, they like something, like one thing at the end that is somewhat cohesive and rounded off. They like a nice ending, because cliffhangers, that's not a conclusion, but people like it. It's like, oh, there's something else. Like, it's the storytelling. It's a film. You've got the beginning bit, the middle bit with all the stuff, and the end, and the ending needs to be rounded out in some way, rounded out in a, this is where we're currently at, or this is where we need to be going. But if you have a conclusion, you're saying this is the end, but science doesn't have an end. So why bother with a conclusion? And when you actually read a lot of academic papers and the conclusions they have, most of the conclusions have, in future research, we should look at this or that, or we need to test this more.
Yeah.
But that's not mentioned online. Those, we could do this in future isn't mentioned. It's, here's a one-line conclusion. Yeah. You're thinking.
Yeah, I am. I'm just very intrigued because from my experience, when I did try to do YouTube, and just from seeing other creators talking about it, there always needed to be a conclusion. It needed to, and I view taking someone somewhere as the conclusion. So they've gone on a journey and the journey has ended.
So let's use an example. Mr. Beast is obviously the biggest creator on YouTube. So we use that as an example because most people will either be familiar with the content or could find it very easily. Mr. Beast, he's got like 12 channels that millions and millions of subscribers. He has multiple conclusions throughout his video because there are multiple challenges. So there's multiple endpoints throughout the video. But he rounds off the video with the one big story. And it's not necessarily a conclusion, because sometimes the story is, in the next video, we're going to do or they're going to spend all this money in that video, or
Mm.
we've now helped out these people, or we've now set up this thing. And even though they are challenges, the challenges, i.e. the journey that they're doing, finishes. What happens after the journey, i.e. the continued conversation, is always left there. There's always a somewhat cliffhanger at the end of it. Like, now this person's got all this money. What do they do with the money? Now this person's got the house. What do they do with the house? Or, oh, they've given all that money back. Where does it go?
Oh, yeah, that's true. So it kind of perks the interest of like, I wonder what this person's doing. And so there's kind of there is a layer of, it is unfinished. That's interesting. It is not finished. It is like, this is the end of this story, but the story will always continue, kind of thing.
Exactly. And Mr. Beast himself is the ongoing story, because he gave 100,000 for this, 100,000 for that, 200,000 for this. What's he doing next? Oh, he's given $1 million away. How can you top $1 million? So then the next video is, how does he top $1 million? Like giving away $1 million. So he has become the story of his channel, which is obviously very useful. And each video has a cliffhanger for each individual personality in the video, but there's no conclusion. there are endpoints of storylines, but there's no conclusion to the channel. It's an ongoing conversation. How we do that in science, I think, could be done better, because at the moment, for whatever reason, we have a conclusion to, this is the end of my video talking about this topic. Why? That's my question.
I think that is the common, I know why, and you probably know why as well. That's what YouTube creators tell you to do. Have a solid conclusion, because it's easier to, it's dopamine. It's like, yay, I got something from it. But what I'm hearing you're saying,
video, they think back at a video 2 minutes later and they can't remember a thing.
Yeah. But what I'm hearing you saying is actually, let's not end the video. Let's keep the conversation going and develop. I suppose if you think about it, there's all of the YouTubers who have genuinely, quote unquote, made it or are continuing to grow. The conversation is based on the person. That's the kind of personality-based YouTubers. It's not a personality, it's the person. They want to know more about the person. They like the person. They find them interesting, and they want to know their journey more.
I think, obviously, depending on the type of creator, but some of the creators that are educational creators, like I watch a lot of educational creators, and I'm interested in the person, but I'm also interested in what they're interested in. Like Smarter Every Day. I do not care two hoots about the Coast Guard in America. One, I don't care about boats. Two, I don't care too much about the safety in America because I don't live in America. But I'm interested in what he's interested in. So when he did a video yesterday, which is why it came to mind. He did a video about a boat, like a boat that saves people. And he was talking about how the boat works, how it reverses, how the boat goes sideways. And I'm like, a boat can go sideways? What? And I was interested in what he was interested in. And it was fun watching me see him interested in something that I normally would not care about, but he's interested in it, and I'm interested in what we can get from it. And some of the things that he was explaining, his mechanics, like the mechanics of the boat and stuff, I was sitting there going, wait a minute, this is, in my mind, ecological psychology was on my mind at the time. This is like constraints and affordances. You can move the bucket in certain directions to give you all of these different movement capabilities, going around in a circle as a boat, etc., etc. And I'm using the video and his interest in a video as an analogy for my own learning. So I'm watching his content, not because there is an end point of this is how the boat works, which kind of is an end point in the video. The boat works like this, but there's also the ongoing conversation of, okay, if that boat works like that, what about the other boats? How are they different? Why do you have different boats? And then all of the other information, like how do they use this boat in that scenario, this scenario, and the ongoing series that he's doing with the Coast Guard. So the video has endpoints in it, like this is how you do this thing, or this is how this thing works. But the overall topic, the overall area, the overall conversation of his interest in the thing is ongoing. It's a continual conversation. And his channel is that. His channel is a continued conversation of him finding interesting things and trying to understand how the interesting things work and move forwards in this world of, well, in his world of weird things, because he looks at some really odd topics sometimes. But that's what's interesting. And the physics girl is another good example. She speaks with her editor, and as a like an ongoing conversation. So she says, do you know about this thing? And the editor most of the time goes, no, I ain't got a clue. Or I have an idea, but not really. And then she goes to explain that thing to the editor. The editor then answers questions, and it's backwards and forwards. So you watch the videos because you're interested in whatever the science, the physics is that she's talking about, but she's explaining it to you as if, well, to the editor, but to you, as if like you don't know what's going on. So it's a lecture, but it's a conversational lecture. And she's sort of saying, and this is where we're at the moment, and this is what we found out so far, and there's going to be a telescope going out whenever, and it's an ongoing thing. And again, like she's got 3 million subs, Veritassim 11 million subs, and all those big channels, those big education channels, again, most of them are in physics because it's easier to say this thing, that thing.
Yeah.
But they all have this ongoing conversation. And then I look at the smaller channels and they say, here's a video about this thing. Here's a video about this thing. And you're like, you've put an endpoint on it. And their channels aren't as big, which, I mean, there could be other reasons for it, but and in the educational science space, I realize I'm talking a lot here. So if you want a button, please do. In the educational science space, there is a channel called Sprouts. You may have heard of it. If not, you've probably seen the videos, but they do videos around educational science. So topics, so the Feynman technique, Bloom's taxonomy, social learning theory, like basically anything in psychology or educational science, even skill acquisition elements, they have videos on them, but they're very short, sort of 5 to 10 minute animated videos of this is this concept, this is this thing, and they're useful isolated. But as we know, education isn't isolated. Well, I say as we know, as I believe, because of my approach into education, isolated information isn't useful unless it's put into a broader context. My ecological dynamics rather than information processing. And the channel has got like 500k subs, but you look at the videos and the videos only get 20, 30k views because you need to know what the topic is before the videos come out. Otherwise you watch the video like, I don't get the point. Where's the reference? Where's the context? There's nothing. The conversation, i.e. the context, isn't there. It's just, here's a theory. Here's a theory. And I subscribe to the channel, but I don't watch the videos until I need to know what the theory is. It's a kind of a, oh, that's cool, but I don't need that now. Whereas the other channels that have a continuing conversation, I'm like, oh, how does this relate to the conversation? And it continues. I'll let you talk.
So how do you do that?
Are you asking me, or you
Yeah,
asking?
I mean, well, I suppose I know for you because you talk about it a lot, but I'm interested because that sounds like the type of video I would want to create. The reason why I stopped creating YouTube videos was because I felt, and my prior belief told me I should have a firm ending, because that is the matter of what is taught. Have a conclusion, take blah, blah, fuck that. If that's not true, or doesn't have to be true, then that opens a lot of possibilities, which I like possibilities. They're fun and exciting. And so my question is, if someone, including me, I'm just being selfish too, but like if someone wants to do that and create content that is an ongoing conversation, where do they start?
Going all the way back to what we started with, the E in express the journey of learning as a journey of learning rather than as a conclusion of the topic. Mr. Beast has said in a couple of things that each video can stand alone, but they stand better on his channel because you get more context. It's very difficult to actually do that, obviously, otherwise more people would succeed on YouTube. But the channel should be an ongoing conversation, and the videos should contribute to the ongoing conversation. And the video isolated by itself should, in theory, have a part of that journey because it's an ongoing journey, rather than it being a discrete individual video by itself. My channel, when it started growing, was an ongoing journey of how to learn Notion. Like the videos alone were useful because you found out a topic, but it was a journey of this is how you learn Notion. Then I realized I don't want to learn Notion anymore because I got to a point that's one, it's boring, and two, I don't use the tool anymore, so it's not authentic to myself and it's not authentic to my journey. So I moved. Yes, a lot of people then don't watch my videos, but I'm still continuing my journey, and moving
It's
forwards
sort of
again.
more for you then.
Yes,
That's the way you viewed it. It's like it's more for you and the people who are interested in things like you are. Would that be correct?
Yeah, like I said with the every day. Wow, I named his channel a second ago, but
Sprout?
yeah, no, the everyday channel, the learning every day, learn something every day. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, Dustin's his name. I've got his face in my head. But yeah, so that channel, the boats channel, the story, the boat video
The
channel.
boat channel.
Yeah. That story is continuing, and it's his interest. Like, I'm interested in Dustin, but I'm interested in his interests. Not normally, like I don't care about engineering. I don't really care too much about physics either, but I watch Veritasium and I watch Physics Girl. But I'm interested in what they're interested in. And the thing that helps me be interested in them is their interest. Like, I hate watching videos where the person's explaining something to me and it's obvious they aren't interested. Like, it's just not fun. Whether it's obvious to me or it's their presentation themselves, like, they don't look excited about the thing. If everyone knows the lecturer or the teacher that stands at the front of the class talking and pointing at a presentation, you've fallen half asleep. I was in one of those web calls and I was on camera and I was dozing off. I'm like, God, please wake up. I'm like slapping myself in the face metaphorically to try and like wake myself up because this person's presenting their research, and I'm like, yeah, you're so boring. But if you're interested and you're talking about things that you're interested, people are likely to follow it. If they're sort of on the same journey, and if they're not on the same journey, you can help them through the journey that you've been through. And that, again, going back to multimedia video and Veritasium's PhD thesis, isn't helping learning because technically it's extraneous load, because it's interesting, and it's not helping learning because it's just information that you don't need, but it helps the interest, helps the motivation. So it could indirectly help learning, because instead of watching the one video that's really useful, you're now watching 5 videos that are medium useful, but you've actually retained more information because you're interested.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I think.
But that right there goes against cognitive load theory. It goes against traditional views of cognitivism, adopts social cognitivism. But how do you explain that? I don't know.
That's really interesting. I gotta admit, even just from this conversation, it's quite an interesting insight into. I think you and I have had countless discussions about my YouTube channel and how much I just hate creating YouTube content because it needed to be packaged in a certain way. But if you can move away from packaging it in a certain way and actually share what you want to share, it's pretty cool and pretty exciting to explore it as some. Yeah, it's a nice new frame on a really old concept of like, you must have these ABCs of YouTube, which is oversimplification and pretty much defines it all. And if I think about the YouTube channels I genuinely actually watch, it's a story that is happening over multiple videos. There is a concept that is happening in one video, but it's not a complete story. It continues, whether it be just like on a video game of like someone's doing a challenge. Every single episode has a main topic, but there is no conclusion. The next episode takes you further into that journey that they're experiencing versus like, here is a concept, and isolating those videos. It's kind of a little bit more exciting to have an experience where it's like a long-term journey.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to bring it back round to the code framework and say the code framework is the individual video. It is the individual piece of content. And that ongoing journey is your experience. And the ongoing journey is what I would want to see more of in the expression sense, rather than the individual video, because what I see is lots of individual videos being dumped out. This is code, this is code, this is code, this is building a second brain, this is my brain, this is my great individual contact and individual video. Where's the journey? Like, where's the ongoing journey of you actually using the thing? And that's what I'm going to try and do in my channel.
I think that's actually quite interesting because people constantly want to know what I'm doing with my I keep hearing messages from people who are genuinely interested in what I do and want to know how I'm doing these things and what I'm actually doing. And I think that's, if I was to go back, I'm not saying I will because I have the podcast, and I think the podcast is kind of doing that right now for me, but it's given me a nice reframe of like, maybe I could do this way. Instead of trying to get a conclusion every time, it's opening up more conversations of things that I've learned, experienced, and it gives an opportunity for long-term connection with people. And it's actually, especially in the space that I inhabit as well, there is no one right way to do business, and it's about exploring things and trying things. And actually, that's a much nicer way of working. Because then you don't have to be, I have a huge problem with experts and gurus and people who think they know everything because they don't. And I have a problem with that expertise based in business specifically. Because
I'm
often,
interested.
Yes.
I'm interested. So gurus, I agree with. Get rid of them. Don't like them. Experts, however.
Let me clarify.
Yeah.
Self-proclaimed experts.
So what's the difference between a self-proclaimed expert and a guru?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because experts and expertise obviously exist because it's in comparison with other people. And I'm sitting there thinking, if you don't like experts, you're saying you don't like people that know stuff. That just seems counterintuitive.
I like people who know stuff. I just think I have a problem when my issue is when they say that they know stuff and they view that information as fact and everyone should follow with no context. I think that is when I have a problem. It's like, for us, you are talking about stuff you're interested in. I am talking about stuff I'm interested in. You are not saying that this is all correct.
No.
Because we don't know.
That's why I've given like 5 examples for everything that I've said.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help for a simple explanation. No,
of course not. It doesn't fit in a 5-minute video either. But it does give me a little bit more to think about in reflection on how, if I was to go back to YouTube, if I found an editor that I liked and trusted and wanted to work with, how I could actually implement that quite cleanly, with me being able to dive into more research topics and then create content around those topics, because it would be very interesting to do. And sharing that experience versus sharing a thing I have to give to people and again titling and
metadata stuff.
I don't care about metadata stuff. If anyone has looked at the podcast, you can tell I just go, we talk about this today, off you go.
I do that. I'm the same.
It's just like I don't want to spend all my time in Morning Fame, which is very good, by the way, looking at all of the titles and the things and that. I just don't like. I want a life.
Yeah, my channel is moving towards the direction that I was talking about, but it does mean because I'm not someone that does restricted research, I'll say. I like to be broad with my research. Time sort of evaporates, which is why the video didn't come out this week, because I was like, oh yeah, I'll give myself 7 days to explore. And I did. I gave myself 7 days to explore, but I didn't account for the fact that editing the video actually takes a day. And actually longer than a day when I start talking about stuff. So the exploration, the actual learning part of it took my entire week. The actual like bringing it together, making it into a video took longer, or it's still taking longer because I'm only I was like, oh yeah, I'll record roughly 2 minutes a day, thinking it'll be around a 14 to 18-minute video. Some days it's like no recording because it's literally just me in front of my computer for like 15 hours. And I basically in the video just go, yeah, I was in front of my computer. It was boring. Next day. But then when I explain stuff, the video, I can tell you this because it hasn't gone out, it's like 8 minutes up to day 6. And then it goes to 16 minutes because day 6 is me explaining this stuff. But those 8 minutes were 2.5 hours of me talking. And I'm like, that's me editing a lot of it down. Like I've cut out bits, cut out sections, I've made assumptions in there. And so I set out my goal. It will not be longer than 20 minutes. But yeah, it's difficult, but moving forwards, it's a platform for me to use because it's an ongoing conversation about how to use or how you could use multimedia video inside of learning. Learning being my ongoing topic, conversation, journey, context, and the videos that I build up around it can be related to that. So extended cognition was sort of related to learning, but it was a separate video. It didn't relate itself to how we could use that in learning because that's not what the video was about originally. Retrieval practice, again, is something that I've done a video on, but it was about me disagreeing with the research that Ali was speaking about because it's outdated, rather than me going, this is how we could use it inside of learning, or this is how we could apply it to cognitive load theory, how we could apply it to dual coding theory, or whatever. So I can have essentially an ongoing conversation about learning through different mediums. That's where the channel's where I plan for it to go, rather than talking about apps and processes, because if people want to know about how I'm doing the thing, well, they can see me do the thing because I'm learning through using the tool. I used Obsidian to do this thing. I used Zotero to do this thing. And if they want to know more about it, go join the membership, whereas I've got like a how to go through things because I can update those videos when I want, when I can't update YouTube videos when they're outdated.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to close it. Got any other thoughts?
No, I'm good. I love it. It's really interesting. I'm kind of like, oh, cool. This is a really nice thing to reflect on later. Ooh, what could I do with this information?
Lots of things, I would imagine. But yeah.
Yeah, probably. That's the problem.
So yeah, expect more in-depth videos. I mean, the Veritasium video, I bring up so many effects and so many concepts that I will probably lose everyone at some point. But it's a journey. It's a long journey. And if you continue watching the channel, the plan is to reference the effects over and over, so you get used to seeing them in different contexts. That's the plan anyway.
I like that. That's quite exciting.
So, signing out.